Good evening, and welcome to the Prince Hall Think Tank, a monthly conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons where we discuss topics relative to craft masonry. My name is Brother Antonio Caffey, and I'm a very proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge number 7, located in Columbus, Ohio, where Worshipful Brother Shaman Stone serves as Worshipful Master. Our lodge was chartered in 1852 by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where currently the Honorable Kelvin J. Davis serves as Most Worshipful Grand Master. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, I would like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodges and lodges in which we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to post them on our Facebook page or by using the chat option on YouTube. And if we have time at the end of the conversation, we'll try and answer some of them. Also, speaking of YouTube, while you're there, why don't you go ahead and click that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all things Prince Hall Think Tank. At this time, I'll let the other brothers introduce themselves. Brother Morgan.
Good evening, everybody. I'm back. Happy to be here. I am Past Master James R. Morgan III. I have the honor of serving as the Worshipful Associate Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia, where the Honorable Philip David is our Most Worshipful Grand Master. And I'm happy to report all is well here in Prince Hall Masonry in the nation's capital. I'm a past master, Corinthian Lodge number 18, and I'm always excited to be here on the Prince Hall Think Tank. We want to apologize to everybody for having to postpone this episode from the other day. We had some unforeseen circumstances, and man, you guys, I don't know about the other brothers, but I got a lot of messages in my inbox and on Twitter and everything else. Somebody threatened to come kidnap my firstborn. I said, "Dag, I don't even have any kids." But you know, we appreciate you guys and your dedication, and we hope that we live up to your expectations tonight. I'm so happy to be here.
Definitely. With the good arm.
All right. Well, starting off for all you Knicks haters, no, I'm just not. I'll say that to later.
End of the show, right? End of the show.
Once again, my name is Brother Dave Gillarm. I'm a past master, the Mount Episcopal Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia, where Cornelius Wilson serves our worshipful master. I also had the pleasure of serving as the worshipful grand historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Bruce A. James serves as our Grand Master. As always, it's definitely a pleasure to be here. I don't know about you all, but I'm excited about tonight's show, and I'm definitely looking forward to learning some great things about Ohio.
All right, thank you, brothers. And that's good. We transition into the topic, tonight, which is Prince Hall Freemasonry in the Buckeye State. So the history of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, as all of you know, is near and dear to my heart. It is the Grand Lodge in which I belong to. So when we were discussing, putting we usually meet and try to come up with our topics and what we want to cover on our shows, and the topic of Ohio came up, and we were putting that together, and then I think I took a little hiatus, and we wanted to, and I'm thankful for the brothers in postponing that until I return, because I was excited to present to everyone the history of my Grand Lodge, Ohio's role in furthering Prince Hall Freemasonry throughout this country. I think it's been well documented, and it's very, very interesting, which you'll hopefully see tonight. As I was explaining before we came on air to the two brothers, actually, when I was putting this presentation together, I really, there were parts of our history, our early history, where we could have actually, in my opinion, done a whole show on, from the formation and how it was formed to the role that Thomas Stringer played, which we'll discuss him as well, in the formation of this Grand Lodge and other lodges, William T. Boyd, and the many activities that the Grand Lodge undertook at the turn of the century. So I don't want to keep everyone tonight there, so what I'm going to do is just present a snippet of each of those individual parts, so that you can just get a glimpse of what was going on in Ohio, and hopefully the role that it played in in other jurisdictions as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hop right into it. I have a presentation that hopefully I can get up and bring up for you guys. All right, are we good to go?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Great. So, Prince Hall Freemasonry in the Buckeye State. So I think really to understand, and I've always said this, not only to appreciate and understand the role that, or to appreciate Ohio and the formation of our Grand Lodge and the history that it played. I think really to understand and appreciate the just the overall what Prince Hall Freemasonry did and accomplished during the time period in which it was thought of and formed. So within Ohio, before our Grand Lodge was started, within Ohio, the Constitution actually, the Ohio Constitution, it outlawed slavery in Ohio in 1802. It also prevented, at the same time it outlawed slavery, it prevented or prohibited free blacks from voting. Let me see. I just want to make sure this is up because I'm looking at the screen and I see it on my end, but I don't see it on you guys' end. So, Brother Morgan, what are you currently looking at right now?
We still see the flyer, the show
Okay.
flyer.
So it's not okay. So maybe I need to do something else.
All right, switch now.
Okay. Okay. So I can't go. Okay. Great. All right. So again, slavery was outlawed in Ohio in 1802, and then it at the same time they prohibited blacks from voting. In 1804, Ohio legislation passed Ohio Black Codes, and in doing so became one of the first non-slaveholding states to place restrictions exclusively on African Americans. To the point when a plan actually to emancipate John Randolph, who was a native of Virginia, he had actually owned 518 slaves. Upon his death, they wanted to resettle those slaves in Ohio, and they developed a plan to do so. Population in that area in southern Ohio actually rose up in anger, and an Ohio congressman warned that if the attempt was made to repopulate those formerly enslaved Africans in Ohio, quote, the banks of the Ohio River would be lined with men with muskets on their shoulders to keep off the emancipated slaves. So sort of this predated the wall, if you will. It was a wall of humans that they were going to put up to stop people from coming over. And then in 1829, more than half also of Cincinnati's African American residents were driven out of the city by white mob violence. So again, this was all taking place in the early to mid 1800s, just to give you an overview of what was happening within Ohio. So the first three, in 1847, William Darnes, John Johnson, Joseph C. King, Sheldon Morris, George Peterson, Asbury Young, and L.C. Llewellyn left Cincinnati and traveled to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Darnes, Johnson, and King had already been made Masons in Pittsburgh. These men sought out Brother Richard Gleaves as a contact to prepare the other four men mentioned to be made Master Masons in St. Cyprian Lodge. So there's a picture of Brother Gleaves, who we'll discuss him as well. He was a key figure in not only getting those men made Master Masons, but also helping the formation and helping Ohio grow. Well, St. Cyprian Lodge held a meeting with Martin R. Delaney, was actually the worshipful master of that lodge. As many of you should know, Martin Delaney is considered the father of Black nationalism in America, and did a lot of great things. But he was actually the worshipful master of the lodge that made those men master masons. So that day when the men went to the lodge, Sheldon Morris, George Peterson, Asbury Young, and L.C. Llewellyn all were received, balloted on, and they were made masons. Several months later, the new master masons, having went back to Cincinnati, they actually sent a request to St. Cyprian Lodge to assist them and recommend them to form a lodge in Cincinnati, to the first independent African Grand Lodge of North America. And through that recommendation, a charter was granted, and with St. Cyprian Lodge approving that recommendation, the lodge was warranted and issued to form Corinthian Lodge number 17 on January 16th, 1848 in Cincinnati, Ohio. Brother Richard H. Gleaves soon discovered, and this is really interesting. So these men had again traveled to Cincinnati, traveled to Pittsburgh. They made masons, came back, sent a letter for to St. Cyprian to help them establish Corinthian Lodge there, and which they done so. So Corinthian Lodge was operating in Cincinnati as a lodge, and Brother Gleaves actually discovered that there was a second lodge in Cincinnati, which had received a warrant from the rival Grand Lodge, which was Hiram Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania. And it also claimed, this was interesting, they had claimed that they not only received a lodge from Hiram Grand Lodge, but that they had also been empowered by the Grand Lodge of Ohio to operate as a lodge as well. So obviously, the Ohio connection was what the Grand Lodge of Ohio. The Grand Lodge of Ohio didn't warrant that lodge to operate as a Masonic lodge in Ohio, and what Richard Gleaves decided to do was re-warrant the lodge and reconstitute it. And on March 18, 1848, True American Lodge number 26, under the authority of the first independent African Grand Lodge, was formed. By this time, when they got the two lodges together, a desire amongst all the Masons in Cincinnati had developed to form a Grand Lodge. So to that end, a third lodge was actually organized and established by Gleaves in Cincinnati, and this lodge would be known as St. John's Lodge number 27. On the representatives of those three lodges met on May 3rd, 1849, and they erected in due form the Grand Lodge for the state of Ohio. The officers of that first Grand Lodge were Brother Thomas W. Stringer, Grand Master, Richard Gleaves, Deputy Grand Master, Joseph C. King, Grand Senior Warden, Ephraim Bancroft, Grand Junior Warden, Owen T. Barton Nickens, Grand Secretary, and George Peterson, Grand Treasurer. So all of these brothers again were excited to set off and set forth as a lodge. Our first Grand Master, Thomas W. Stringer, which we'll hear a little bit about him. I believe Brother Morgan is going to do a piece on him a little later. But he was actually born in Maryland, and he was an ordained minister in the AME Church. And he was very gifted orator and an organizer, and those skills actually assisted him at the same time in organizing churches, not only throughout Ohio, but throughout the country, and at the same time establishing Masonic lodges as well. He would later go on to help organize the Prince Hall Grand Lodge in Mississippi and become the first Grand Master of that jurisdiction as well. So being a new Grand Lodge, they were quite active. Between the years of 1849 and 1859, there were actually 21 lodges warranted by the Grand Lodge. Very first lodge to receive a charter from the Grand Lodge was actually a lodge Richmond Lodge in New Orleans, Louisiana. So again, let's put that in the context. 1800s, men actually, black men traveled from north down to New Orleans and helped start a Masonic lodge. And I've always found that amazing when reading our history. And again, looking, that's why I tried to stress that earlier at the beginning of the presentation, really understanding the time period in which all of this took place. But the first lodge out of the three that was chartered was actually down south. So Ohio would go on and form one or more lodges in West Virginia, Mississippi, Indiana, Louisiana, Kentucky, North Carolina, Illinois, Missouri, Tennessee, Kansas, Alabama, and Michigan, among others. All right. So again, very active. Stringer, Gleaves, and a lot of brothers. Really, I mean, reading the early proceedings, it's almost like they had a plan in place at the beginning of the Grand Lodge, and they knew. Not only were they forming the Grand Lodge here, but they knew the role that it was going to play, I believe, in my opinion, throughout the country as well. The National Grand Lodge and Ohio's role in it. I think that Ohio's role within the National Grand Lodge, again, in my opinion, it was strange. I think sometimes misunderstood, and at times, I believe, not told correctly. So in 1850, the National Grand Lodge issued a warrant to to the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio a year after it was formed. In the history of our Grand Lodge, Brother William Parnham states, and I found this interesting, it is quite evident that they were not fully advised of the real purpose and claims of the national body at the time, as they had not read the warrant, had no chance for its examination, nor did they so much as hear it read until June 20th, 1856, 6 years from the time it was granted. So I find it interesting because, the argument by some that's often made is, well, the National Grand Lodge formed Ohio and Gleaves was operating under the authority of that body. And, if that's the case and Gleaves, and I should have stated this earlier too, this isn't, I'm not going to spend time debating the National Grand Lodge and its merits or anything like that. I'm just telling you, based off of what I read, in my opinion, on what was written, some interesting things. It's just surprising to me that Gleaves didn't see a need to have that warrant read to the Grand Lodge, and it took 6 years for them to do that. I think Wesley, in Wesley's book, I think he puts it's funny where he's just, basically he makes it sound as though they received a warrant and he just put it in the file cabinet. And then 6 years later, it's like, oh, we have this. Let's go ahead and read it. So, a year. So the warrant was finally read in 1856. And then a year later, after the warrant was read, so in 1857, during the Grand Lodge session, a resolution of withdrawal from the jurisdiction of the National Grand Lodge was taken. After discussion, a vote took place, which resulted in a tie, and the Grand Master at that time, John Parsons, gave the casting vote for withdrawal. So instead of withdrawing on the last day of the session, the matter was actually reconsidered, and instead of withdrawal, it was resolved that the lodges and their representatives would go back to the subordinate lodges of the jurisdiction, and they were instructed to basically have a conversation and take a vote within the lodge whether or not our Grand Lodge should withdraw from the National Grand Lodge, and then bring the results of those that conversation of those individual votes back to the next Grand Lodge session. So for about 11 years after that, Ohio would internally debate and debate and debate on if it should withdraw from the National Grand Lodge. This discussion, it actually caused a lot of disharmony within Ohio and beyond, and the decision to finally withdraw from the National Grand Lodge was actually made during a special session in 1868. So, but during those 11 years, as I said, it was a lot of conversations going on. And I think while the story over the years had always been that Ohio, led the way when it came to Grand Lodges leaving the National Grand Lodge. Again, I think you really have to understand that it was a very hard decision, according to our proceedings and looking at our proceedings. It was really a hard decision for brothers of the jurisdiction, and it caused a lot of issues. There's evidence. There's, again, through our proceedings, there's evidence of a lot of brothers being on board with the National Grand Lodge within Ohio. We had several lodges appeal to Pennsylvania for a warrant to remain with the National Grand Lodge if Ohio was indeed going to leave. My own lodge, St. Mark's Lodge number 7, located in Columbus, Ohio, our 3 principal officers actually stole our charter and left, and they were going to form their own lodge, and stole our charter and then wanted to be rechartered by Pennsylvania to operate. And because when they took the vote, the majority of the craft in the lodge voted to stay, and the 3 principal officers wanted to leave. So they left and they took the charter. Luckily, the charter was immediately reissued by our Grand Lodge. You have certain lodges, some of our lodges that exist currently today were formed because of issues within lodges around the National Grand Lodge back in the 1800s. So again, it wasn't always, Ohio was against the National Grand Lodge. It was against the National Grand Lodge. It was some support as well. But again, like I said, I would say the majority actually won out, and Ohio did pull out. So, and after that, the story has been told on previous episodes how that started that domino effect. All right. So, again, during this time period as well, other very interesting things within Ohio took place per our proceedings. In 1865, Edward Fulton, who was a Grand Master, doing his address to the Grand Lodge, he stated, "You are all aware that a large expanse of territory is open to us in the South and Southwest, and with it comes many great advantages, by reason of which our people will naturally flow in that direction. And those of the craft who immigrate will carry with them the good news of this ancient and honorable order. In a short time, steps will be taken to organize new lodges by applying to the nearest Grand Lodge. And here I would say that there is now a very strong desire on the part of Masons and gentlemen not belonging to the order in several places of the South to have lodges organized, and they will soon take the preliminary steps to that end." So I found that interesting for a couple of reasons. One, I found it interesting that the Grand Master would think that, again, given the nature of what was going on during this time period, the blacks would want to move back down south, given the racism of the day that they, definitely, they faced it up north, but they definitely faced it down south too. But I think more importantly, this actually shows that, and I've always held this thought, that it was the individual Grand Lodges that was doing the work and were concerned with growing Freemasonry amongst African Americans, and not the National Grand Lodge. You have it right here within the proceedings where it states that, hey, this thing of ours, it's going to spread. People are going to be interested in it, and we need to be able to take advantage of that to spread that. And again, you see that in not only Ohio's proceedings, but you see that and other Grand Lodge proceedings as well. And actually, and it's interesting because I read off all of the lodges that that we helped form and outside of the state, and eventually Ohio would actually find it very, very difficult to manage all of those lodges. Because you're talking about traveling, and traveling, as you all know, back then was vastly different than it is now, both by the means of doing so, and then also traveling as an African American throughout this country, especially, going down south. So that eventually you start to see that in some of our proceedings where it was just too difficult to manage, to manage the territory that the Grand Lodge had expanded to. In 1866, during the afternoon Grand Lodge session on June 20th, the Committee on Foreign Correspondence, they submitted the following resolution. Resolved that in view of the rapid increase of Masonry in the United States, the conflicting claims of jurisdiction, and in order to better secure the harmony, cordiality, and fraternity throughout the entire craft, wheresoever dispersed, the Most Respectable Grand Lodge for the state of Ohio and its jurisdiction requests all Grand Lodges to meet in the city of Cleveland on or about the 1st of October, AD 1866, clothed with power to transact any and all business which may be calculated to bring about a fraternal intercourse with all of the lodges and brethren wheresoever dispersed. J.R. Blackburn, W.T. Boyd, and David Jenkins. Again, I find this interesting for several reasons. Now, the least of which is it shows again that it was Ohio took the lead in trying to communicate with other Grand Lodges to come up with the plan and increase the harmony throughout the craft and outside of the National Grand Lodge. So they saw, I think, the importance of Grand Lodges working together, but the brothers just didn't understand. Well, not necessarily they didn't understand. They didn't think that that should be done by a national body. They thought that the individual Grand Lodges would be able to take care of that. All right. So in 1867, during a report of Most Respectable Grandmaster John Jones, who had been he was actually a strong proponent of the National Grand Lodge at one time, he stated, "Brethren, in relation to the National Grand Lodge, it becomes our duty to look well and examine the workings of this organization, for it is a large body, and unless properly governed, it will beget a misunderstanding between itself and the state Grand Lodges. I learned through the published proceedings of the last meeting held in Baltimore, October 1865, that a new constitution, rules, and regulations are to be submitted for adoption in its next session. In 1868, I warn you now that if this constitution, rules, and regulations are adopted, peace and harmony will be forever banished from the national compact. You will therefore look well to the east, prepare and govern yourselves accordingly. National Grand Lodge must have its checks and balances, or it will kick the beam." So he said that in 1877. So again, even after we left the Grand Lodge, we still dealt with the National Grand Lodge and its concept, and it really caused some disharmony between some of the lodges or Grand Lodges that we helped establish as well. So throughout that, and really just keeping up to date on what the National Grand Lodge had done or was currently doing in the other Grand Lodges, you then have this good brother, William T. Boyd, enter the stage. So in 1869, Most Respectable Brother Boyd was installed as the 10th Grand Master of the state of Ohio, and he actually held that office for 6 years. So I always look at Boyd as his time as Grand Master. He did some good things, but at the same time that he was Grand Master, he also served as the CCFC for the jurisdiction. He had actually served, I think, a couple years or some years prior to him becoming Grand Master. And when he became Grand Master, he did not give that up or didn't want to give that up, so he maintained that position at the same time that he served as Grand Master. Our 1869 Grand Lodge session was the first Grand Lodge communication in which Boyd went into extensive details about what was going on within other jurisdictions within his CCFC report. And he made 3 classifications when he wrote about what was going on with Freemasonry. He listed our Grand Lodges, which were the predominantly Black Grand Lodges, which came from African Lodge, originally from African Lodge number 459. Other Grand Lodges, which were the mainstream or predominantly white Grand Lodges, and then also the National Grand Lodge. So he had sections on each of those Grand Lodges, and he went into great detail about what was going on within those jurisdictions. So, it was to sit back, and I hope one day soon to really come out with a book or pamphlet on his time as CCFC, and then have his reports in there, because he gives great detail about what was going on during the day. And what I really appreciate about Boyd is, I think more than anyone else, he understood and he knew that our proceedings were not only speaking to the members of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, but to other Grand Lodges as well. And because he knew that they would be reading our proceedings, he established relationships with a lot of people, and they sent him proceedings, and he sent our proceedings to them. And again, I find that fascinating that he knew that if he wanted to send a message, that that was the best way to send a message through his report and our proceedings about what was going on in Ohio, and also to what was going on within other Grand Lodges as well. I know Brother Morgan will find this interesting. He during our when he was reading the DC proceedings one time, he had stated that it's from this Grand Lodge that we learned that the National Grand Lodge was formed by the Grand Lodge of Boston, the first African Grand Lodge in North America, and Hiram Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania, not one of which was on the record of the proceedings of 1865 of the National Grand Lodge, nor to the best of our knowledge have the above named Grand Lodges any existence at the present time. So once again, one of those, I find it fascinating type of things that he said, it is from this Grand Lodge we learned that the National Grand Lodge was formed by, those Grand Lodges. And it begs the question, like, so was he saying that, previous to DC putting it into their proceedings, they didn't know how or who formed it, or, it's how he used those words. I think it just raised some questions as well.
Well, Brother Caffey, DC, we do that. We try to educate and enlighten brothers from all throughout the country. So, that's how it's always been, and that's how it is,
even way back then, right?
Way back then. We are here to help.
There you go. Also, he noted in the 1865 proceedings, he talked about Louisiana, and he noted that Grandmaster Oscar Dunn, during his address to his Grand Lodge, he objected to state Grand Lodges in the North establishing subordinate lodges in the southern states. So Boyd he was the originator. I would turn Boyd is the originator of the clapback. So because what he would do within his proceedings, he would put down what the person said from another Grand Lodge, and then he would immediately respond within the proceedings as far as how he disagreed with them. So, but he did state that, or he noticed that based off of, and he gathered again all of this information from the proceedings of the various Grand Lodges in which he received. Was also very interesting about Boyd's ability to get proceedings is he got a lot of proceedings from predominantly white Grand Lodges as well during this time. So he was in communication with those Grand Lodges, even though that there wasn't any, obviously any mutual recognition established with those Grand Lodges, but they still were able to submit their proceedings, or they were willing to submit their proceedings to him as well, and he was able to review those proceedings and then put those within our proceedings. So obsession is a strong word when it comes to Boyd, but again, reading the proceedings, I think Boyd actually he became obsessed with establishing mutual recognition with mainstream Grand Lodges, both within the United States and in Europe. In 1870, he actually sent a letter to the Grand Lodge of Ohio requesting that lodges of the Most Merciful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio either be absorbed into the Grand Lodge of Ohio as regular lodges, or that our Grand Lodge be considered regular. He also understood how regularity, and I think that was one of his main issues with the National Grand Lodges, is he just saw it as an irregular body, and which would lead to our Grand Lodges never being able to establish mutual recognition agreements with other Grand Lodges. And I think that's why he was so against the National Grand Lodge, because he saw that as standing in the way. A lot of Boyd's stances on particular subjects really told the line, because again, he didn't want to risk alienating the folks that he wanted to establish mutual recognition with. During one Grand Lodge session, he actually stated, "The 15th Amendment to the National Constitution and the celebration of that event has been a source of no little trouble to me. While the passage of that righteous law is of the greatest moment and has everything to do with us becoming a part of the citizens of the country in which we live, it does not in any way concern Masonry, and I have deemed it highly unmasonic and inappropriate for us in the character of Masons to take any part in any political celebrations, especially after the letter caused to be forwarded to the several lodges under our jurisdiction. That the brethren be very cautious in their actions in view of the petition that had been presented to the Grand Lodge of Ohio." But Boyd basically, he didn't want anyone celebrating the 15th Amendment, because he thought that, again, it would jeopardize the chances of Ohio establishing that mutual recognition agreement with the Grand Lodge of Ohio. I mean, again, and also, I mean, he actually at one time, he actually proposed that the Grand Lodge dissolve itself. And then, because the argument back then was, well, okay, Prince Hall Grand Lodges, you weren't formed right, you were formed incorrectly, we heard all the old arguments. He actually proposed that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio dissolve itself and reform itself, and make sure that our Constitution, code, and everything is correct, and hoping that would then take away that argument that was used back then against Prince Hall Freemasons. So this is something that he really, really cared about, and something that, again, I think, in my opinion, borderline on obsessed about as well. And 1872, Boyd actually even took exception to something that past Grand Master Thomas Stringer said. That was actually it was mentioned in he saw it mentioned in Missouri's proceedings, but I guess Missouri was commenting on something in Mississippi, and Boyd read it, and then actually and after Boyd read that within our proceedings, he stated, "We would urge Brother Stringer to take the chair and caution the craft about allowing these Ohio Masons to do work in their jurisdiction. Brother Stringer was the first Grand Master that presided over the Grand Lodge for the state of Ohio, and so efficiently and completely has he done his work that there is not one track or trace of the footprints of his official career left upon the sands of time to mark the occult administration of his official duties." So basically he said, okay, Stringer did all this great stuff, but one thing he didn't do was keep good records of it. So we have no, it's we're taking a man's word for it, or he should have did a better job in keeping documentation of it. So Boyd didn't care. He went after everybody. He went after our first Grand Master, went after other Grand Lodges and other Grand Masters as well. In 1872, during a CCFC report regarding the National Grand Lodge, Boyd wrote about various people trying to find out. He wrote, previous to his report, he wrote various people trying to find out what occurred at the National Grand Lodge session, which was held in Chicago on October 2nd, 1871. I guess he was trying to, since he wasn't there, he was trying to find out from brothers that went, okay, what happened. So several brothers did write him back. One brother said, "You asked me what they did in Chicago. I will say that the great fire burned the proceedings to ashes, and the ashes were blown into Lake Michigan." Another brother wrote, quote, "I think it is dead, dead, dead. I fought it alone for 6 days at every step. I voted against every motion and every resolution that looked towards keeping the association together." And lastly, John Jones, past Grand Master of Ohio, and he had stated, quote, "You asked me what was done at Chicago. I will tell you, my dear friend, notwithstanding I attended every day, and I cannot tell what they did unless I tell you that they did nothing. I will tell you that they did nothing. They did not hold an election. They had nobody to elect. They saw the things was dead. They did not adopt any plan for the future action. They had none. They did not adopt any resolution. They had none. They tried to collect the dues from some of the Grand Lodges but failed. I think they have collected the last dollar in this country. I hope so, at least. Our state is done with them. They will have a good time collecting dues from Illinois after this." So he wrote all those letters, and what he wrote, requesting the letters. He got the letters back, and and one thing with Boyd too, he didn't keep stuff to himself. He took those comments and he put it right in our proceeding. So again, he just he kept tabs on American Freemasonry. I wouldn't even limit it, like I said earlier, I wouldn't limit it to Prince Howard Freemasonry. He kept tabs on everything that was going on within the United States if it had to do with Freemasonry. So mutual recognition. In 1875, again, back in 1875, we actually established mutual recognition agreements with the German Grand Lodge League, the Grand Orient of Peru, and the Grand Lodge of Hamburg. In 1876, the Grand National Orient of the Dominican Republic, and then also the Grand Orient of Italy. So thanks to Boyd and other brothers, they found those Grand Lodges. And again, what I find interesting, way back then, they did not have any stipulations upon the recognition agreement, meaning they didn't state that Ohio had to first establish mutual recognition with its in-state counterpart before they would recognize Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. Oftentimes, Boyd personally knew several Masons in Europe, and they had urged him to write the various Masonic magazines that they had in Europe. They urged him to publish a history of Prince Hall Freemasonry in the country as a means to educating the members in Europe of Prince Hall Freemasonry, and then that made it easier when the subject came up to vote to establish that mutual recognition agreement. I'm sorry. Okay, so no, I'm sorry, I skipped something. Can't skip this. 1887, the Grand Chapter Order of the Eastern Star for Ohio and jurisdiction was organized. Today it's known as Amherst Grand Chapter Order of the Eastern Star. So that was formed back in 1887. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this stuff together. Okay. One thing at the turn of the century that the Grand Lodge dealt with, both, I guess, both within our listed within our proceedings and also trying to put a plan in place, was clandestine Freemasonry. Within the proceedings, we see a resolution that says, whereas the territory of this Masonic jurisdiction is being frequently invaded by imposters peddling spurious masonry, conferring the degrees and organizing Masonic bodies without legal warrant or authority, and whereas these fraudulent acts by irresponsible parties have a tendency to retard the growth of legitimate masonry, of which this Grand Lodge is the exponent thereof, be it resolved that this Grand Lodge forbids the display of the jewels or use of the Dugard signs and passwords recognized by this Grand Lodge before any organization or individuals claiming to be Masons not in fraternal relation with this Grand Lodge. So we the Grand Lodge would actually go to court in several cases to fight various clandestine and bogus Grand Lodges and really take it, I think, more seriously during this time period than we do today. So again, with the turn of the century, we found the Grand Lodge taking on several endeavors and doing several things. And what I found interesting too, in 1908, we actually adopted a child and became the guardian of one Gertrude Venable, and we paid for her expenses while she was living with her grandparents. So we started to do a lot of I think more now than we did during the 1800s. Started to do a lot of more charitable work within the community that our lodges were situated in. When Grandmaster Corey Adams was elected to the Grand East in 1912, he really placed an emphasis on Masonic education. He previous to that time, Ohio was actually using several rituals, and he decided that instead of using several rituals within our Grand Lodge, we need a single ritual so that we're all studying the same thing, saying the same thing, and practicing the same type of masonry. So he also was concerned with Masonic education and its impact on the fraternity. He stated that there's a mistaken idea by many of the brethren of today that so long as we meet, transact business, pay dues, and authorize the wearing of a Masonic pin, we are Masons and are conducting a Masonic lodge. Now, he said that all the way back in 1912, and I think that that quote can you can apply that quote now more than ever. But that's another episode that we'll talk about. Lodges are also urged to observe St. John's Day. It was stressed by the Grand Master that no candidate should be passed or raised unless he made necessary proficiency in the preceding degree. So this is when you start seeing our Masonic proficiencies within our jurisdiction take hold as well. He also, Grandmaster Adams also urged the creation of Masonic schools of instruction to really teach Masonry to the brothers of the jurisdiction. At the 95th Grand Lodge session in Columbus, Charles Wesley, then president of Wilberforce University and later the president of Central State University, addressed the Grand Lodge, and he actually extended an invitation to hold its next convention on the campus of Central State University. Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio would actually hold its Grand Lodge session at Central State for 18 years. In 1955, the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio issued our first official ritual, and this would make our Grand Lodge one of the first Prince Hall Grand Lodges to use a coded ritual. So we went from using various rituals to using the jurisdiction using one ritual to the Grand Lodge actually writing their own coded ritual and making that the official ritual of the jurisdiction, where it still stands to this day. And then lastly, 1995 and 1997. In 1995, the Grand Lodge of Ohio established mutual recognition finally with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where we have full joint visitation. And then in 1997, we established mutual recognition with the United Grand Lodge of England as well. So again, snippets on our history. I wish I could go into more detail about everything, but you know, we be here all night. But I just want to let brothers know that Ohio's history is very interesting because it impacts all of us in some way, shape, form, or fashion. If you think about it, we get back on screen. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, it really in reading the proceedings again, it's beautiful because it speaks to the early formation of Prince Hall Freemasonry and how it spread and the difficulties that brothers back then faced with organizing this large organization, keeping the peace and really trying to push it forward. So yeah, I thank you all for allowing me to present the history of our Grand Lodge this evening. All right. I think Brother Morgan is up next.
Man, I want all of our Prince Hall Think Tank viewers to know that they always pick me to go after the brothers when they do these great presentations. It's really not fair. I want you guys to take up, you know, I need somebody to get on change.org and start a petition or something. That was dynamic, and I don't know how I can follow that, but I'm going to try. I put together a little something for everybody. It's nowhere near as long or as detailed, but I did want to at least highlight some of the things about Ohio's jurisdiction's history that I kind of found very interesting. And it's funny that Brother Caffey mentioned Thomas Stringer and the remarks that Grandmaster Boyd made about past Grandmaster Stringer. So I want to kind of get into some of the things that I think are kind of interesting. And you'll see how important I feel that Grandmaster Stringer was, not only to Ohio, but indeed to a good portion of this country and our neighbor to the north. So let's kind of get into it so we can get on with what we're doing. Let's see here. I'm going to go. We're going to go right here. All right. Do y'all see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. So the topic of my discussion, the title of it is, as you see there, Onward Christian Soldier. I want to talk very briefly about the traveling ministers from Ohio and the role that they played in the growth of Prince Hall Freemasonry in the 1800s. All right, so we'll just move on from there. So first up, I want to talk about somebody who I don't think is very well known, but I think should be. This is Reverend Jordan W. Early. He was a member of Prince Hall Lodge. You see there on the slide, I wrote Prince Hall number 1 because that's what that lodge is denominated as today. However, originally that lodge was established as Prince Hall Lodge number 10, if I'm not mistaken, in the city of St. Louis. Reverend Early is an early example, no pun intended. He's an example of circuit riding AME ministers. And if you all remember, we did an entire episode on the AME Church and the Black Church and Prince Hall Freemasonry. So, but just to refresh your memories, the AME Church was very, very influential in the spread of Prince Hall Freemasonry, primarily because of men like Jordan Early, who were circuit riders. Well, what is a circuit rider? The AME Church structure was set up in a way that it wasn't as focused on the individual church, meaning the stationary position of a building as much as it was that you had congregations which would share traveling ministers that would go throughout what was called the circuit of their particular district or conference or state or what have you, and that's kind of what they were focused on, especially very, very early on in their in that denomination's life. So you had people like Reverend Early, who, although he was a member of the jurisdiction of Ohio, and his lodge was in St. Louis, Missouri, which at that time was under the jurisdiction of Ohio. He's traveling throughout the state, throughout neighboring states, and he even travels as far south as somewhere like New Orleans, Louisiana. And his brother Kathy mentioned earlier, Richmond Lodge was the first lodge chartered by the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio. What a lot of people may not know or may have skipped over in their reading is that Jordan Early was actually the original impetus, if you will, for the brothers in Louisiana to kind of organize themselves into a church. And although he did not have the authority to grant them a Masonic charter or anything like that, he did kind of put the bug in their ear. They were already, some of them were Prince Hall Masons themselves already, but it is documented that he actually did have informal conversation with them about, hey, you all need to, organize your church, but also get your lodge organized so that you can be about the business of what our community needs. So I think that's something that we definitely need to highlight. Reverend Early has a biography that was written about him. I believe it was either by his wife or his daughter. I can't recall. So please forgive me about that. But if you Google his name, it'll pop up very easily online. But he was also a very active abolitionist and agent of the Underground Railroad. And reading through his biography, you'll actually find references to the fact that his affiliations in the abolitionist circle and in Masonic circles overlap, just as they did with many other ministers of that era. Okay, so when you look at the history of St. James AME Church in New Orleans, which was kind of the birthplace or the womb of Prince Hall Masonry in Louisiana, in part, we have to thank Jordan Early. I know we're going to get to Stringer, and Stringer gets a lot of that credit down in Louisiana, Mississippi, but Early was there. Early actually got there, I think, first, if I'm not mistaken, although he was a contemporary of Thomas Stringer's also. Next up, I want to make sure that we highlight Reverend Moses Dixon. He was also a member of the jurisdiction of Ohio, but at a time, but he resided in Missouri. This is very crucial. I'm sure at some point in the future we're going to get to talk about the history of the jurisdiction of Missouri. But at one point, and Brother Caffey, I think Brother Caffey kind of skirted around this just a little bit. But at one point, the jurisdiction of Ohio actually had more Grand Lodge officers that lived outside of the state, particularly in Missouri, than they did within the state, which I think is very interesting. Reverend Moses Dixon was actually the Grand Lecturer really during the height of Ohio's growth period, during the climax of Ohio jurisdiction's power. He was the one who was physically going to these various places and setting lodges up, granting charters, etc., and teaching them the Masonic work, so to speak. So we have to give credit to him. Reverend Dixon would eventually become Grand Master of the jurisdiction of Missouri. He also was active in an organization called the Knights of Liberty, which was a secret society, secret organization that had a sole purpose of ending the slave trade and moving the country towards emancipation by any means necessary. They were doing this decades, really a century before Malcolm X would say those famous words. Okay, Reverend Dixon was quoted as stating that he had thousands and thousands of agents throughout the United States that were ready to react at any time that a proper signal was given to begin kind of a guerrilla war against the slave South. And had it not been for a stroke of fate, where they decided to delay that action because they saw that with the actions of John Brown, who I'm going to speak about momentarily, they saw that the whites in the North and whites in the South were probably going to end up starting a war themselves. And so Reverend Dixon, people like Martin Delaney, who was also involved, they felt it was wiser to wait and let the two sides of North and South fight themselves rather than blacks start the war and then the white North and white South turn on blacks. That was something that was a really risky move, I think, but one that ultimately, as we see, kind of worked out in the end. But Reverend Dixon is somebody we have to remember. He's also the founder of the Knights of Tabor, which was an organization, another fraternal organization that was created to kind of remember the history of the Knights of Liberty and the things that they had done as well in their degrees. They also established Taborian hospitals throughout the South as well. And last thing about Reverend Dixon is he's very important in understanding the introduction of the heroines of Jericho among women of African descent in America. So we definitely have to remember him. And if you're ever in the state of Missouri, I highly suggest that you check out Father Dixon Cemetery, which is a historic black cemetery there in Missouri, named after this great Prince Hall Mason, who at one time was Grand Lecturer of the jurisdiction of Ohio. And last but not least, this is an image of Reverend Thomas W. Stringer. This is the man who was the first Grand Master of the state of the jurisdiction of Ohio. I actually want to thank Brother Ken Collins, who's not on here tonight, for providing me with this picture of him, because there's like one other picture of Reverend Stringer, one or two other pictures that people get to see. This one is not as well known, but now you get to see it today. Reverend Stringer started out, as was mentioned earlier, as a district deputy Grand Master for I believe for the first independent African Grand Lodge of North America. He is said to have sat and been and served in every Masonic seat, from which I imagine means from the Tyler or from Junior Stewart all the way on up, every step of the way until he got to be a district deputy Grand Master, and then served as Grand Master of the state of Ohio. Reverend Stringer is, in my opinion, if he's not on your top 5 or top 10, top 20 list of Prince Hall Masons, then I don't know what Prince Hall Mason you're looking at, because he, in my opinion, is one of the most important Prince Hall Masons, and possibly one of the most important black men of the 1800s in American history. And unfortunately, a lot of people just don't know enough about him. Reverend Stringer, as was mentioned earlier, was an AME minister. He served as an elder and a presiding elder, which, if you wanted to put that in Masonic terms, to be a presiding elder is almost like being it's really, to me, the same thing as being a district deputy Grand Master, and if you want to put it in Masonic terms, for those who don't know. But he, not only did he serve as Grand Master of the state of Ohio, after leaving office, he would then go on to the country of Canada. He would go further north, and although his time there is not as well documented, we do know that he served as deputy Grand Master of the Widow's Son Grand Lodge of Ontario, which is now today the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ontario. He is documented to have established at least one of the lodges up there that I don't believe exists any longer, but he established Prince Hall Lodge number 5 in I believe it was in Chatham, if I'm not mistaken. Forgive me if I'm getting the city wrong, but he established that lodge with the then Grand Master of Ontario, Dr. Thomas Kennard, also a Methodist minister. Now, in Canada, for those who do not know, they did not establish the AME Church in Canada under that name. is known as the British Methodist Episcopal Church. It's basically the same organization, and I don't know the exact reason, so forgive me on that. But they didn't keep the name of the African Methodist. They went with British Methodist. It's a different country, so I don't know what those politics were. So I do apologize about that. But if you know, please leave it in the comments. But when the British Methodist Episcopal Church was established, Dr. Stringer was right there to help get it set up and established, and he was active in it during his time in Canada. You'll notice that I said Dr. Stringer. Reverend Stringer actually studied theology and medicine while in Canada, and that's something a lot of people don't know. So you'll oftentimes see Reverend Stringer, Grandmaster Stringer, Dr. Stringer. It's the same guy, just different names, so to speak. One issue that you had in Canada in the 1860s, however, in that jurisdiction, was when the Civil War broke out. A lot of blacks, whether they had been runaways or legally emancipated or born free, a lot of them began to actually leave Canada and come back south into the United States to find their family members, to fight in the war, and also to assist in the Reconstruction era efforts. And Dr. Stringer, Reverend Stringer, was no different. He actually returned to the United States in the 1860s, and he actually would basically make a beeline for Vicksburg, Mississippi. And while there, he would become the worshipful master of a lodge named after him, Stringer Lodge Number 1, today known as Stringer Lodge Number 1, which operated ironically under the jurisdiction of Missouri. So it's like he went from being Grand Master back to a worshipful master of a lodge. And then when some other lodges were established from Missouri in the official date is 1875, although I have some suspicions that they may be incorrect, but we'll talk about that another time. Reverend Stringer would actually go on to become the first Grand Master of what's now today known as the Most Worshipful Stringer Grand Lodge of Mississippi, Prince Hall affiliated. And that's how much the brothers in Mississippi love and respect Dr. Stringer, that their Grand Lodge is not known as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge. It's the Stringer Grand Lodge of Mississippi. Dr. Stringer would go on to become very active in Mississippi politics with during the Reconstruction era. He served as, I believe, treasurer, if I'm not mistaken, for his county, if I'm not mistaken, with the state legislature, and did a number of other things politically. He is one of those individuals who actually would advise many of your Reconstruction era senators and legislators, what have you, because of how prominent this man really was. Something a lot of people don't know about Reverend Stringer is that he actually was a part of the famous meeting that was had in Canada with John Brown, who before his famous escapade at Harper's Ferry. A lot of people don't know that had John Brown succeeded, his plan was that he actually took from some black abolitionists like Martin Delany and Thomas Stringer, was that they were going, if they been able to secure the arsenal at Harper's Ferry and successfully establish kind of a territory, if you will, they wanted to establish a provisional government. If you look at the minutes of that event, when they established they laid out a provisional constitution for what that government would look like and the demands that they would have, et cetera, et cetera. Dr. Stringer was one of the signers of that provisional constitution during his time in Canada, which I think is a very, very ambitious thing. And if you think about his connection with Moses Dixon and all these other individuals, Martin Delany, John Brown, you got Dr. Thomas Kennard, who's another important individual. You'll see these brothers were about their business and that they were very serious about the ending of slavery. And I think that it was very bold of him, if you think about his life, going from Maryland to Pennsylvania to Ohio to Canada, back down to Vicksburg, Mississippi, where he would serve as Grand Master until his death in 1893. I think that was very bold of him to establish Prince Hall Masonry in a state that is, in the heart of the old slave South. To this day, Dr. Thomas Stringer is the only Prince Hall Mason to have served as the first Grand Master of 2 different jurisdictions. He is the only person in all of, and I think maybe all of legitimate Freemasonry, as well, Prince Hall Masonry in particular, that has a Grand Lodge named after him outside of Prince Hall. And although I think that the brothers in Mississippi have had the opportunity to name their Grand Lodge Prince Hall at some point in the past, if I'm not mistaken, they chose not to because of how much respect that they had for this man. And I think that he's very well deserving of it. His ministry as well as his Masonic career was highly influential on a lot of people. And I've said all that, and I left out the fact that he was the first president of a historically black college, which no longer exists. But he actually was the founding president of Campbell College, named after Bishop J.P. Campbell, in Vicksburg, Mississippi. This school does not exist any longer. However, Reverend Stringer was the founder of a historically black college, the founding president. These are important things. So although I know, Brother Caffey, that you read off that quote from W.T. Boyd, the sands of time may have washed away much of his the records of his time as Grand Master of Ohio, but nothing could erase the legacy of this dynamic man, Grand Master and Prince Hall Mason, and Reverend Dr. Thomas W. Stringer. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time.
Excellent. And it sounds like, he was the brother was too busy working. He was, like you said, he was
right
about his business, and that's what happened. But again, Boyd was Boyd. Boyd being Boyd, that's what I call it now.
How about that?
Brother Gillarm, what do you got for us?
Wow, and I'm supposed to come behind both of those. All right, so I guess I'm gonna give it a shot. All right, can you all see the presentation?
Yes, sir.
All right. My presentation tonight, I'm gonna talk about the Ohio connection to Georgia. Early Georgia history is kind of cut and dry. Our first two lodges were chartered by Massachusetts. The third one was chartered by Pennsylvania. And the original charters was, so I guess this is really unique, that the original charters for all three of those lodges are still in existence. But when I started looking at our fourth lodge, which was Bradwell Lodge number 4, located in Columbus, Georgia, I started digging into where did the men come from that started those lodges, and that what led me to the Georgia-Ohio connection. So I named this presentation From the Queen City to Electric City to demonstrate the connection between Cincinnati and Columbus, Georgia. Columbus, Georgia is now known as the Fountain City, but earlier nickname was the Electric City, and it was called this due to the amount of electric plants or the power plants that gained their power from the Chattahoochee River, and because of this, they were able to provide a lot of electricity throughout the city. One of the early men, as Brother Morgan so eloquently stated, Thomas Stringer is definitely going to be in your top 20 Prince Hall Mason list. In that list, I would throw Horace King in there as well. These are just a couple of bullets about him. Brother Horace King was a former slave that was emancipated around 1846 by act of Alabama legislature. And so far that I've been able to find, he may have been the only person that, or one of the very few people that was emancipated due to an act of legislature. He was a bridge builder. He built several bridges throughout the Chattahoochee Valley, over in Mississippi as well. He traveled throughout the South building these bridges as a slave. And even after being emancipated, him and his former slave owner basically went into business together and continue building bridges. He's going to become very important here shortly. This is extracted from the 1867 proceedings from the Grand Lodge of Ohio. What we're looking at is the roster for St. John's Lodge number 3. There are 3 names that are highlighted: M.D. McLeod, Murdoch McLeod, Horace King, and Isham Cooper. You can also notice on the left side is Thomas W. Stringer. Even though he was associated more well known with being a member of True American, he was also a member of St. John's. But Murdoch McLeod, Horace King, and Isham Cooper become the first principal officers of Bradwell Lodge number 4 in Columbus. So what it appears, especially with Horace King, his family tradition states that he went to Ohio and became a Mason, and then he came back to the South and continued that membership in Alabama. It was stated in several documentaries that he was made into the mainstream Grand Lodge of Ohio. It doesn't seem like that would be true at all, but there is actual proof that he was made in what is now known as the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, which really makes sense. And it seems like the other two men traveled up from Columbus and were made Masons in this same lodge. So after 1867, I couldn't find where these men names appeared anymore on the roster of St. John's Lodge. So it's more likely they had left the state of Ohio. Isham Cooper ends up going to the state of Louisiana, where in March of 1870, he wins the the Louisiana State Lottery in the amount of $5,000, which equates to $90,000 in today's money. Then he comes back to Columbus. He established a saloon with Murdoch McLeod. Horace King, on the other hand, goes to Montgomery, where he becomes the charter senior warden of Relief Lodge number 4, which I believe now was later renamed to King Solomon Lodge. So after becoming the charter senior warden of King Relief Lodge, he then comes back to Columbus, where he meets up with Isham Cooper and Murdoch McLeod in October of 1870, which is also kind of odd because during this time, he was really a member of 2 separate lodges. And to make it even more interesting, at the time, Ohio was part of the independent, not Ohio, Alabama was part of the independent Grand Lodge, and Georgia had received a warrant from the compact. So Horace King was essentially a member of an independent Grand Lodge and a quote unquote compact Grand Lodge at the exact same time. But Isham Cooper, Horace King, Murdoch McLeod become the first worship master, senior warden, and junior warden of Bradwell Lodge number 4. This lodge went on to produce great men such as William Terry, who becomes Grand Master, who's the only person to become Grand Master in Georgia twice. William Spencer, Richard Porter, and this lodge also initiated Horace King's son, John Thomas King, who became the second worship master of Bradwell Lodge. So in essence, it's because of St. John's Lodge number 3 in Cincinnati that we were able to have what we now call the Big Six, or Lewis Hayden number 6, formerly known as Bradwell Lodge number 4 in Columbus, Georgia. So this concludes my presentation on the Georgia-Ohio connection.
All right, thanks, brother. All right, so as we're wrapping up tonight, I think we can go into the closing in regards to any closing thoughts or anything that Brother Gillarm or Brother Morgan, that you may have before we officially wrap up. Let's start with Brother Gillarm.
It's definitely, I learned a lot about Ohio in this show, and I'm almost thinking that we need to probably do part 2 in the future because there's a lot more to Ohio that we didn't even get to really touch. As always, just want to thank everybody for their support of Prince Hall Think Tank. It truly means a lot. I guess be on the lookout for some other short videos that we're going to continue to have. be on the lookout next season. The New York Knicks, you know, we coming. It's gonna happen. I'm kind of saddened tonight. I'm kind of thrown off that we will not be able to have a stern rendition of Sweet Home Alabama. So I mean, without hearing that, I mean, I don't really know what to do right now. But also, as my, you know, with my upcoming work schedule, I'll be somewhere all over the place. So do not be surprised if I pop up in your lodge wanting to visit. So I just want to thank everybody for your support of the Prince Hall Think Tank, and look forward to seeing you next month.
Brother Morgan.
Well, you know, I'm very excited for another great episode. You know, I too learned a lot in doing this research and listening to both of your presentations. You know, William T. Boyd, man, he's a sticking point for me, man. I'm like 50-50 with him sometimes. But one thing I love, and I'm gonna let people know this, okay, about me. And I was in denial a long time ago, but I got checked out by the experts, and I realized that I like petty stuff. Like, I like petty comments, you know. So when I hear some of the things that he was saying, I just go, wow. Like wait till I use that on somebody else later. Like, you know, obviously not one of my brothers or my sisters or anything, but I'm gonna use that on the job or something at some point, you know. So I appreciate that. But other than that, you know, I'm just so thankful for all the support that we get. You know, I had the pleasure of attending a couple of lodge visitations outside of my jurisdiction past couple of weeks, and you know, each one I went to was like, oh, Prince Hall Think Tank, you know, Prince Hall Think Tank, and so, you know, I just, you know, we just appreciate the love and the support for everybody. So thank you. Yeah.
All right, I got one thing. I can't forget this. I can't leave this out. Give a shout out to my one of my good friends, my brothers, brother Jerome Williams from Lewis Hayden No. 6, and Worship Master Turner. When I asked them for pictures of the banner and, you know, lodge pictures or whatever, they did not hesitate to help me out. So I'm give a shout out. You probably will not hear me ever say too many other praising things about Lewis Hayden No. 6. They kind of like we have a lot of brotherly love in Columbus, but I definitely want to give those brothers a shout out. Since our lodge ever formed, man, us and Lewis Hayden, we always been tight. We always helped each other out. And just like this is a great example. And I asked them for something and they didn't hesitate to provide it. So just wanted to give a shout out to the Big Six.
All right, thanks, brothers. And again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. You know, the formation of our lodges and grand lodges is an important aspect of Masonic history, not just Prince Hall history, but Masonic history, and I would say, you know, American history. And again, when they were formed, you know, I think we illustrated that tonight with Brother Morgan detailing, you know, the you know, what the brothers that he discussed, you know, what they went through, and also Brother Gillarm as well. You know, that just again, appreciate, look at the time period. I think sometimes we don't, you know, we read the history and we find, you know, okay, that's a good read, but we really need to first really put our minds into that time period to really appreciate it, in my opinion. So, you know, I'm looking forward to our continued exposure to the other history of our grand lodges. You know, we stand committed to informing everyone about our history. As we have more episodes, you know, that feature the history of our respective grand lodges, you'll soon see how everything fits together as a puzzle. So again, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your continued support. As the two brothers that, you know, like we said before, you know, it's amazing to be out somewhere, to be at a meeting or to be in an event, and someone says, oh, you know, the Prince Hall Think Tank. You know, I look at that and you know, brothers appreciate that, or people appreciate that. So we appreciate you and appreciate your support, because without your support, we wouldn't be able to do this. So again, thanks for joining us tonight. We hope you gained a little insight, and we hope you join us on future broadcasts of the Prince Hall Think Tank. Have a good evening, and remember, let's teach masonry in our lodges.